Well, good morning, everyone. We just completed a forum with various businesses of all sizes to talk about tax reform. I think everybody is already aware of where we are. The House tax reform bill will be on the floor of the House this week. In the Senate, we'll be doing what we call marking up the Senate version of the tax bill in the Finance Committee. That'll be an open process with amendments and all the rest. And hopefully by the end of the week, we'll have a Senate version of tax reform out and on to the floor, ready to be considered the week after Thanksgiving. The two bills are similar conceptually. They differ in some of the details, which is not unusual in Congress. But let me just outline the goal here. The last 8 years, we've experienced very tepid economic growth in our country. We believe the reason for that is over-regulation, and if you're looking for an example of what that can do, look at the coal industry in southeast Kentucky, and our incredibly bad tax code, which hasn't been scrubbed, if you will, in 31 years. The last time we did comprehensive tax reform, Ronald Reagan was president. So what we're trying to do here is to make, on the corporate side, on the business side, make America competitive globally again. Our 35% rate is one of the highest in the OECD, makes it very difficult for our companies to compete around the world. And we tax overseas profits, making it more likely profits made overseas by our companies stay overseas. So goal one is to get the corporate rate from 35 down to 20. Most American businesses are not corporations. They're what we call pass-throughs, LLCs, S-corps, to get their rate at a comparable rate so that you don't discriminate against smaller businesses. And with regard to overseas profits, have a one-time repatriation that is, bring the profits back to pay taxes. And then in the future, with American businesses doing business overseas, they'd only pay taxes once, and that is where they're doing business. All of that is designed to keep our folks' jobs here in America rather than being exported to other countries. On the individual rate side, our goal is for the average middle-income person to get roughly a $1,500 a year tax break. In every level of bracket, in every bracket, the average taxpayer will get a break. So that's the goal, to stimulate American business, to get our growth rate going, to get us up to what we should be averaging in a country like ours. Roughly 3% growth a year would be an appropriate growth rate to get us going again and get out of this tepid trough that we've been in for a number of years.
Will every middle class rate or taxpayer get a tax cut?
You can't guarantee every single taxpayer gets a tax cut because everybody's tax situation is different. So what you target here is the average, and the overwhelming majority of taxpayers in the middle class will receive relief. And as we define the middle class, roughly $1,500 a year.
But elimination of the property tax deduction, could that result in higher taxes for some middle class folks, especially in the Northeast?
Any way you cut it, there is a possibility that some taxpayers would get a higher rate. You can't craft any tax bill that guarantees that every single taxpayer in America gets a tax break. What I'm telling you is the overall majority of taxpayers in every bracket would get relief.
How different is the Senate, what you're proposing in the Senate, and what the House is proposing? How different is it?
Yeah, they have a lot of differences because the bodies are very different. And the important thing is the average taxpayer getting relief? And the average taxpayer is, in both bills, they do differ, because the bodies are very different. And what will happen is we'll end up in a conference. The House and Senate will end up in a conference and have to work out the differences.
And what's the likelihood that the conference, what comes out of the conference will be passed?
Overwhelmingly likely. What we hope will happen is the conference will finish before the end of the year. I don't think there's any question the House and Senate will finish soon. How difficult it is to resolve the differences is kind of hard to predict, but the goal is to resolve the differences and put it on the president's desk before Christmas.
Will this take effect for next year or 19?
Depends on what the final bill looks like.
You've said before that by giving companies tax relief and tax reform, that they'll be able to create more jobs, that'll help the middle class. That aside, how will the middle class see their taxes change? How is this going to have a practical effect on them when it comes time?
Well, the average taxpayer, in the middle class, is going to get about a $1,500 a year relief.
You tried to repeal or replace Obamacare. It didn't happen. Members of your own caucus were partly voting against that. How likely is it that you can keep everybody together to get tax reform passed?
Well,
Yeah,
highly likely. Highly likely. I think there is great enthusiasm for this subject and a great desire to accomplish this for the American people. And I don't see anybody in our conference who is looking for a way to get to know. I think everybody thinks this would be an important accomplishment for the country.
If you fail at getting this passed, there will be people who, the president.
Yeah, but that's not what we're talking about here. You're asking me hypotheticals. What I'm telling you is there's an overwhelming likelihood of success.
There's another funding deadline coming up on a spending bill that's
Yeah.
December 8th. You need 8 Democrats to join to reach 60. How close are things there?
Yeah, we're in bipartisan, on funding the government is your question. We're in bipartisan discussions now. The Democrats obviously will be a part of that. Not many of them are interested in tax reform, but on the configuration of the bill to fund the government for the balance of the fiscal year will be a bipartisan negotiation with, obviously, the president and his team.
So no government shutdown?
No.
How does tax reform, how do either of these bills help America's most vulnerable, the poor and the disabled?
Well, everybody who is a taxpayer gets some relief. The lowest income people get a doubling of the standard deduction, which is huge help to the lowest taxpayers. But remember, the lowest level of taxpayers don't provide much of the revenue. You've seen these reports about how people who are more successful get more relief. Well, that's because the top 10% of taxpayers provide about 70% of the revenue for the government. So even if either of these bills becomes law, the people at the top will still be paying the freight. I mean, they'll still be providing an overwhelming percentage of the revenue for the federal government. At the bottom level, we feel like doubling the standard deduction helps taxpayers at the bottom in 2 ways. The most important way to many of them is they may not have to go to H&R Block anymore because it'll make it a lot simpler to file their return.